Sometimes we're often asked after we've given a performance how this all came about. How did we happen to write this play? And I guess it was just a matter of David and I both being devotees of Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day, particularly me for Dorothy Day and David for Thomas Merton. And I had studied Dorothy Day for years, and David had studied Thomas Merton for years. And so about 5 years ago, we were given the use of a vacation home in the Redwoods by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange for a week. And we took our laptops and we took our resources and our memories of what we'd studied, and we sat down and we wrote. And every day we would write. We wrote for 5 or 6 hours a day. And we would write for maybe a couple hours, and then we'd read what we had written. And he wrote Thomas and I wrote Dorothy, and then we started kind of weaving it together and putting it together, and that's how that came about.
It's kind of ripened over the years, but the initial creative effort was back then. And part of the day we would drive up to the Avenue of the Giants and sit under the redwood trees with our little laptops, and so parts of it were composed under the giant redwoods of Northern California up by Redway. So it was a delightful, creative kind of time just to get away and do that. You know, Merton was called, at one point in his life, he was called the spiritual director of all of America. Because many, many Americans read Merton for a kind of spiritual guidance, spiritual direction that they sometimes fail to receive in their churches or from homilies at their churches. So many people turn to Merton's writing because he seemed to speak to a deeper kind of place in people's lives. And Merton was also, it's like his life grew in these expanding circles that you might initially think, well, his life contracted. He went into this monastery. But some people have said of Merton that it's like he just stood still in the monastery and stood his ground and went deeper and deeper and deeper in one place. And some people jokingly said he went so deep standing in one place that he came out on the other side of the planet in Asia and China. Because if you know of Merton, one thing that's not addressed in the play is that he not only in his later life wrote furious essays against racism and violence and war, but he also initiated major inter-religious dialogues with all the major religions of the world. And even the Dalai Lama knows and talks about his meeting with Merton on Merton's Asian journey before Merton was killed. And a while back, the Dalai Lama said in an op-ed piece that many mornings he wakes up and he asks himself, what would Thomas Merton do today in the face of these global situations of interfaith rivalry and war and violence? So he's been a man who's very significant for me personally, but also globally. You know, his books have been published in almost every language.
And Martin Luther King had an appointment.
Martin Luther King had an appointment with to see Thomas Merton that was scheduled a week after his assassination in 1968. It was a difficult year of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King and losing Merton December 10th of that same year of 68. Many people say 1968 was a kind of cracking apart of the cosmic egg, that the coherence of our worlds kind of broke apart during that year, and these were some of the fissures in our collective symbolic universe that we lived in.
When Dorothy Day died, the New York Times, the writer in the New York Times said that she was the most significant Catholic, you get this quote.
The most important, significant Catholic figure in the history of Catholicism.
American Catholicism.
American Catholic, and all as a lay person with no official church position at all.
Right.
Except living the gospel radically.
She would often say that she was as far right as you could go in her religion, and as far left as you could go, we may get my left and right, politically.
And economically.
And economically. She is up for canonization. The Claretian Fathers have taken on the cause, as they say, and Cardinal O'Connor was the first one to bring this about. She's been made a servant of God, which means that the process has started. In November, Cardinal Dolan, who's president of the American Bishops, had a meeting with all the bishops, and he asked them to support her cause for canonization, and they voted 100%. unanimously, which is probably a rare event for bishops to vote unanimously on anything.
It's pretty rare.
But they voted unanimously to support her cause for canonization. We've had the privilege of performing our play in various places here in California, at Vancouver, Canada, New York, Kansas City, Chicago. So kind of a range of places. Atlanta, and so all around we've been able to take our play and go places. And our reason for doing it is because we simply want to get their message out. They've been important to us, and we want people to know more about them and to hear their message.
You know, I used to give lectures and workshops on Merton, and I still do that. But at some point I thought, how do you allow Merton to most effectively reach the most people possible? And so we started talking about creating plays using these teachers, so that in a play, well, in a lecture, it's like you're talking about a third person who isn't there to an audience. You're talking about a third person's ideas. But in a play, it's like that person shows up and speaks conversationally with people. And it seems to engage people at a different level of personal engagement, more than talking about their ideas that you may agree with or not agree with. You know, I'm sure you agreed with some of their ideas and didn't agree with other. But there's something about that's indubitable about a person's presence. And so we try to bring their presence to people. And let their journey of their heart's awakening somehow be a mirror, so that people can look into their lives and see it as a kind of mirror of their own heart's slow, struggled journey toward greater and greater awakening, and toward greater and greater and more universal, nonviolent love, compassionate love toward the world. Assuming that that's the trajectory of the journey that we're all on. And Merton and Day both bore radical witness that we are made not just to take care of our private, separate egos, not just to worry about my world, but to awaken to our love for the world, a much broader kind of vision. And these thinkers teachers have helped us to do that in our own life, even though we're just beginning. But I think they can be instruments of other people's awakening, and seemingly they have been. Most people find this is sort of a different situation with cameras and things here, but many people experience the plays we do as a kind of retreat experience. You know, so I always say in these plays, they're not just to inform the mind, they're meant to awaken the heart in some way, to touch and awaken the heart, and not just some ideas.
Dorothy Day has impacted me probably more than Thomas Merton, although they both have. But Dorothy, I moved to Kansas City, Missouri in 1983, into the inner city of Kansas City, and I had not heard of Dorothy Day until I met David, and then he told me about her, and I started reading about her, and she became a role model for me on how I wanted to model my life and how I wanted to live my life from that time. A life of trying to live simply. I don't do the voluntary poverty very well, but I do try to do simple, and trying to be of service, and trying to live a life of prayer, and most importantly, her views on war impacted me to the core, so that I can no longer support war, and I can no longer support the military complex that this country has, an empire that this country has become. I mean, and I say support, I support that part of it. Obviously, I love America, but that whole area is an area that I protest and try to work for some change, particularly nuclear weapons and the drones and things like that. So her, you know, she was just an amazing woman, and so willing to speak out against war, particularly World War II, when nobody was speaking out against World War II, but she continued to speak out against all wars. So for me, Merton has impacted me in his contemplative prayer, his call to contemplative prayer, and to be a little quieter, which is a real challenge for me, to be a little less active, which is a real challenge for me. But the two of them combined I think helped to bring some balance of prayer and social justice action for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, for me, you know, they're both, they're like two facets of what I found to be two facets of my own journey, and I think for all of us in a way. It's like, I think we're all called to a more radical inner journey and a more radical outer journey. And we need people that bear witness that there are alternative ways of living that the culture doesn't necessarily offer or validate. For example, the larger culture doesn't validate a radical inner journey, where somebody like Merton and Day, in her own way, challenges us to go on a radical inner journey, whether it is approved by the larger culture or not. And the other side of that is they each call us, and me in particular, toward a more radical outer journey. How do I live out a life of prayer, a life of action and love? How do I live out a life of deeds, so that I'm not just having a private kind of inner enlightenment, but how do I bear living witness to this some way in the world? And you know, it just kind of affects and guides me. I think this, right now, one of the things that in terms of the outer journey is that Sharon and I are spending a lot of time not just going around giving these plays, which is great, but we're also spending usually a day or two each week up at a place called St. Camilla's Center, which is a ministry up in LA. It's right across from the General Hospital in LA, so we spend time working with the chaplains in at that hospital, which is it's the big safety net hospital for the LA area, where all the uninsured and drive-by shooting victims get taken to, and all the homeless get taken to. So you know, looking for ways that we can be part of gospel communities, help form gospel communities. Both Merton and Day bore witness to that. And as she says at one point, you know, it's the whole spiritual journey, I think, is about learning how to surrender to love. Mm-hmm. You know, it's whether in the inner dimension or the outer dimension. Life is about, a spiritual journey is about, being a human being is somehow about surrendering to a life of awareness, compassion, and love, and allowing that, as Merton says, to grow toward divine proportions of love and mercy. Mother Teresa once said, she made this prayer, she said, may God so break open your heart that the whole world falls in. You know, may God so break open your heart in the kind of narrow confines that we each find ourselves in. May God so break open your heart that the whole world falls in. That our heart is meant to provide a loving, compassionate hospitality that's broader and broader and broader. And as Christians, we would say, all the way to the fullness of Christ's bearing witness to universal, nonviolent love in the world.
And so what advice can we give? I would say that first would be to really pray the prayer, how am I called to love today? How am I called to love today? Mm-hmm. And then being quiet enough so that you hear the response within at some point, and then responding to that. Finding a way to respond to that. So, you know, the thing that draws my most attention are the war and peace issues. Others are drawn to the death penalty, abolishing the death penalty. Others are drawn to immigration. Others are drawn to poverty. Others are drawn to environmental. And so it's finding what is your passion, and then stepping into that passion and really working to make a change in the world with what you can do, with what you individually can do. And it's so easy to just create a little bubble around ourselves and just say that I'm just going to be here. I'm going to be really good and really loving right here in my own little family. But obviously Jesus said, love as I have loved, and that means we go out. We go out further and further and further. But start where you can, mm-hmm. and
start close in.
As David White says. Yes. And so that would be, I think, listening to what's the most loving thing you can do today, and then what stirs you, what moves you, and educate yourself on that and go deep in that. Richard Rohr said one time that if we all would take our passion and go deep in that passion, we would all come out at the same source, the same place.
That they all connect. If we each give ourselves away deeply in one place, that deepening journey opens out into the broader groundwaters that all the other wells are tapping into, I think, into something universal, a universal spirit that unites all of us, I believe. So we might just encourage you all, and encourage myself each day, as Sharon says, to listen, and to listen. And I think if we listen deeply enough, we'll realize that what's at stake in each moment, each event, and each decision is a surrender to love. That's what's really being asked if we listen deeply enough. Or if you're a Buddhist, you know, it's the great compassion that tends to well up and affirm itself when we step into a deeper place than our separate egos. So whatever your path is on, go deep in that path.
Every spiritual tradition has a call to love.
That's
Every
true.
spiritual tradition has a call to love. So that's what we encourage people to do, is to follow that.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for letting us be here, and thank you for this. Thank you. Thank you.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.